Has Mike gotten here?
Yes.
Good, good, good.
Hey, Mark.
How you doing?
I'm doing great.
Hello, everybody. We are live, so you may start, Martha Ann.
Well, welcome everybody to this legislative review. As we try to do annually, but we missed last year, I think, because, well, I know we missed last year because of the pandemic. So we will try to get things going again this year. We're delighted to have Senator Mike Dugan with us and Representative Tyler Paul Smith, who will be telling us giving us their take on the work of the Georgia General Assembly this past year. I have requested that there be no discussion of the election bill, HB 202. The League of Women Voters of Georgia has signed on to a lawsuit against the bill, and therefore we are not to discuss it at this particular time. But we want to know everything else that went on in the legislature. So which one of you two is going to begin?
I vote for Tyler Paul.
I'm going to vote for the majority leader.
Hey, I will say that Tyler Paul had a great first year. You know, the House has got like 2,000 people in it, it seems like. And every year they all change. And it typically takes those guys 3 or 4 years to make a positive impact and be recognized as somebody that it has got everything together, has the intelligence, the ability to work with people, not only in their own party, but on both sides of the aisle, and able to accomplish big things. And that for him to be able to do that within his first year was impressive. So with that, buddy, I'll let you go first.
Thank you, Majority Leader. I appreciate those kind words. I'll say this, I had good tutors like yourself to help guide me and teach me a lot along the way, and very grateful to have a partner like you in the Senate. It's good to be with everyone. I know that we had what seemed like a fast-paced session this past year. We were conscious of the pandemic and trying to deal with the unknowns that we may face and trying to get our business done. But, you know, there were a lot of good things that we did. I know we're limited on time, but some of the efforts that I think I would like to outline, it was actually a Senate bill that I helped carry over in the House. The good thing is the Senate was able to pass the version of this probation reform bill out before we were able to get the same version out of the House. And so to tell you a little bit about this bill, it was Senate Bill 105. The governor signed it just a few weeks ago. This is a really good bill for all of the state, not to mention the criminal justice reform aspect of it, but also the savings to the taxpayers of the state of Georgia. I'll start out by saying that back in 2017, the General Assembly did great work to pass criminal justice reform in the area of trying to reform our probation system. And if any of you know anyone who's been on probation or have been involved in that process, we have one of the highest number of people on probation in the whole nation. So through the efforts of the General Assembly, they addressed that. We had to come back and clean it up a little bit this year to really give more of a finer edge to the legislation that they had passed in 2017. This actually deals with all 3 pathways to early termination of probation. This is not a get off the hook easy situation that you're dealing with. This is actually a reform that for those that have proven their rehabilitation, they would then qualify for early termination of probation. That means in part that they have not reoffended. They have paid all of their fines and not had anything more than just a very small technical infraction of their probation term, which one of those examples would be they missed a payment by a few days or a couple of weeks, but they made the restitution and their probation fines good. So would also say that by enacting this, we're going to save state taxpayers $34 million by having folks who shouldn't be on probation finally off of probation supervision. This will really allow the corrections department to focus their efforts and their officers on those individuals who still need oversight from the state during their probation period. So very glad to be a part of that. I appreciate Senator Dugan and his help in the Senate in passing this bill over to the House, and thankful to the governor for signing it.
Mr.
Okay,
Dugan?
Mike?
Sorry. I thought I couldn't figure out what happened to me. You get the cool points award by having your own sound system in your house. That's impressive there. But Tyler Paul was talking about, and was maybe kind of lost on everything else, is we passed more bills on public safety and public safety reform this time than we did in any other category. Some of the ones that we passed may not mean much to y'all, but they do to the people that are in the career fields, like a firefighter. It's under, you don't think of that as under public safety, but that falls under the public safety area. If a firefighter has a heart attack while fighting a fire, before he wasn't covered and his medical costs weren't. Now they are, which again, doesn't sound like it changed the fate of the free world, but for those guys that are out there protecting us every day, that's an important step. I think with Tyler Paul, one of the things he probably would touch on a little bit was the releases of people an unsecured judicial release. So I could release you, I could give you $1 million bond and then release you on your own recognizance, so you don't pay $1. That's not right. That's a judge making playing both ends against the middle by saying, I'm tough on crime because I've put this guy on $1 million bond, but then he turns around and says, hey, you promised me you'll be good. You don't have to pay anything. We don't care about that. We just think that if you're going to release somebody on their own recognizance, it ought to be listed as on their own recognizance. Don't play games with the public on what you're doing there. So you can still do your recognizance bonds, but you have to say they're recognizance bonds. We have one, again, it's another one, it's voluntary, but if you have a condition, you're a driver of a vehicle and everybody's subject to be pulled over or you go through a roadblock and you have a medical condition or neurological condition that may trigger you to be checked deeper by law enforcement because of your condition, you can voluntarily put on your driver's license, I have this. And so the police pull over and go, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. That would be the slurred speech, the delayed response. That is attributable to this condition. That makes sense. We don't need to check him further. I'm going through these things. You're asking about what we did this session. I don't see if you can think. This is the cliff notes of the past bills this time, and they go everything from agriculture to Veterans, Military Affairs, and Homeland Security. So, and then at the very end, vetoed legislation. And there was one bill that the governor vetoed, and that was the chief labor officer. I know Mark Butler well. You know, he's obviously from the area. I like Mark. Mark and I go back a long time. His family and I have been really, really close. But we don't feel that the unemployment claims were handled as completely and as properly as they should have been. We felt he needed some help. Maybe the way we designed it was not the way to go, but I am still getting calls from constituents here that are months behind on their unemployment claims. And that's just not satisfactory. If we make a promise to our citizens that in case of event A, they will be eligible for this compensation while they're getting on their feet, then they ought to be able to expect that. So that was the only bill that the governor vetoed. So I would, if Tyler Paul's okay with it, I would prefer to open it up to y'all for questions, because as you see with this list, and on each page, there's 5 bills on this page. So unless you want me and Tyler Paul to go down through this list and stop at midnight, I prefer just to let y'all ask some questions. But about everything but the elections bill.
I'm agreeable to that too.
Well, we hadn't really decided how we were going to do this. This is an experiment for all of us.
Uh-huh.
Well, and if y'all want to get some together real quick, I mean, I could come in on a couple more. I just want to kind of prime it real quick. One thing, if I may, you know, we looked at really one of the things that came through the Judiciary Non-Civil Committee over in the House that I actually sit on, both the subcommittee and the full committee. We had HB 231 carried by Houston Gaines, and this was expanding the scope of protective orders. If you read the law as it was before this bill passed, if you had a situation where you had someone, 2 individuals that were dating one another, they might not necessarily fall within the scope of a protective order. And so we found ourselves with situations where, take a college student, that if a young lady was dating a young man that was being very abusive physically or even mentally to her, that she really had no option under the law to protect herself. And so this was something that we really parsed through in our subcommittee that I sat on that heard this. And we truly, I think, brought to the full House and then over to the Senate a bill that will protect those individuals that found themselves as victims of domestic violence without any kind of recourse. So I'd highlight HB 231 as one of the great pieces of legislation that we worked on. Also, HB 128. Apparently in the state, there was a opportunity and even a couple of instances that we were had brought our attention of discrimination and organ donor transplants to those with physical or mental disabilities. And so Representative Rick Williams actually carried this bill in the House, and then it passed the Senate as well. But this would actually, in Georgia law, prohibit discrimination in situations where you had organ donor lists that had individuals within those lists that had some kind of physical or mental disability. And so for us, it was really a situation where the state, not that there was any malicious intent to this originally, but you had a situation where they were preferring lives without disabilities to those with disabilities. And so I really think in our fight to protect life from the cradle to the grave that this change in how we treat those that need organ transplants, we don't discriminate on the basis of physical or mental disability. So I'm very happy that we passed this piece of legislation and hope to see good things to come from it.
Hey, Tyler, Paul, if I could add to that, to go with you had to be a, in quotes, healthy patient to be an organ donor. So you have a lot of people that are HIV positive that need organ transplants. You have a lot of people that are not HIV positive that need organ transplants. Both were required to use organs from a non-HIV positive donor. What the Grady and other HIV intensive institutions were asking for, and we gave them, is if you have a person that's HIV positive that wants to be a donor, and you have an HIV positive patient that needs an organ, now you're eligible to take the organ from one and give to the other. So you're increasing the availability of organs out there to those that need them. And again, it's not, you're curbing some of the restrictions that we've had historically, and a lot of them just stemmed out of ignorance from 20, 30 years ago, and we have never updated it. So we dug in this time and made sure that we had those opportunities out there for those that needed it. I'd like to, Paul, I don't know if you remember this one a little bit, but the teacher pipeline package, where the Professional Standards Commission is actually creating innovative programs to increase the number of minority teachers entering the profession. And they're using a lot of programs designed to increase student enrollment in higher ed institutions at both historically Black colleges and universities in the state and the university system in itself. We have a need, and it's a dire need. So just like we do with businesses that we attract, we offer programs to attract those that may be interested in giving back to their communities back at home, but are not the stereotypical white females. I mean, my mom and dad were both teachers, for those of y'all that know them. But we need people that don't necessarily just look like us in the classroom. And we need people that are not wanting to go to the highest performing schools to teach and go where they're most needed to do it. So we incentivize them to be able to do that. All right. Marlene, you got questions now?
Yes, Ms. Anil Colvins has a question.
I do have a question, and it's not about the past session. It's about redistricting. Can you tell me what kind of timeline you're thinking about and what kind of openness you're going to bring to the process? Thank you.
Okay, that's about as deep as I can go, because honestly, we don't have the information yet on, we have what the state numbers are. We don't have them broken down by regions of the state. So we'll start this summer. Chairman Kennedy, John Kennedy, in the Senate, and Tyler Paul, I don't know who it is in the House. We'll start open hearings across the state. I think they said in July, and all that, we still won't have all the information then, but they'll travel around with open hearings so that citizens that are involved or interested in the process can let their voices be heard. We honestly won't have the information, the detailed information about the area breakdown until late September, early October. And at that point, we will go back into a special session, probably in the November timeframe. And that's where everything that will result from the 2020 census will be taken into account.
And just for reference, Chairman Bonnie Rich will be heading up the redistricting part on the House side, but I'm with Majority Leader Dugan here. We just really don't know or have much to be able to comment on until those numbers are broken down and provided to us. So look forward to it. I know, I think I was going into my junior year of college the last time I actually went over and watched the last redistricting process in 2011, I believe it was. And I'd actually invite all of you. I don't know if the Capitol will be open or not, but would invite all of you to come over and, or at least stream it online of the proceedings. It's a different kind of session and very interesting. Something good to learn from, and it only happens usually once every 10 years. It's a great process to watch and be a part of. I can remember as a young college student, I was just in awe of it, and to see how everything was moving. The state has changed since 2011 for sure. So stay tuned. It'll be a lot of fun.
There is a question in the chat. It says, are they still calling it probation when people who can't pay for traffic tickets make arrangements to pay off the ticket over time? If they can pay, it turns into a warrant and you'll be subject to being arrested and put in jail for not paying the warrant, which will cost them even more money or time to get out. Do they still do that with traffic tickets? Is it still being done in Carroll County?
So as a matter of fact, yes, I was actually in municipal court this afternoon in Carrollton City. Y'all have a very fine staff there. Judge Mecklin's very fair. Your prosecutor, Mr. Bob Harker, is a great individual and very good to work with, as well as the public defender for Carrollton Municipal, Mr. Bonanno. And so what I would say to you is this: yes, you would technically be on probation for a term until you had paid your fine. Usually what you would see is there is a fine depending on what the charge is, even a traffic charge. And depending on what the deal brokered between either the individual who has been arrested and is representing themselves, or they have an attorney, you would negotiate terms like that. Usually for misdemeanors, of course, traffic citations, you can see them structured across 12 months. And there are several different ways you can work that. Usually the court, they don't want you to be supervised for a whole 12 months. That's really putting a strain on the caseload, where we could use those supervisory resources on those that actually may need those more than others. And so you could see that structured to where, yes, you are technically on paper going to have probation for a period of 12 months. However, if you were to pay, say, a $500 fine and you had community service along with that sentence, that as soon as you paid the fine in whole and as soon as you completed your community service, your probation could terminate early. Now, that's just one hypothetical I can give you. That is a very good incentive for someone to get off of probation. And look, several years ago, I'll use this was actually in Superior Court, but I had an individual who had been charged with spotlighting, and he had a financial hardship. And so talking with probation, this is where you can really see your probation officers. They get a bad rap a lot of times, but you don't hear the good stories like this one. I structured for him to pay a $500 fine across 12 months' time. And that was also with the probation fees. Usually there's anywhere from a $40 to $50 probation fee on average associated each month as you go. So it is more than just the fine that you have to pay back to the court. But I structured it in such a way to where my client could afford it. So the good thing is, I don't know that you want to necessarily codify it so much and hamstring things, when really the process as it is now we can negotiate with one another. The defense lawyer can negotiate, the judge has discretion, and you give probation officers a much needed really situation where they don't have to supervise people if they go ahead and have their probation fines paid off, and they can move on to other people. But if they need the time to pay the fee, that's still allowed to be structured in such a way to help them out as well.
There is another question. What has been done for veterans in this session?
Wow, that's a loaded question, because depends on how you're looking at it. It's not just veterans; it's also veterans and their families. If you have a person, and obviously this is near and dear to my heart, having served for as long as I did, and you travel all around the country. If you have a teacher or a hygienist or a nurse or any spouse that comes with you that has a professional, has a job that requires a certification. One of the things that we did this year at the request of Department of Defense was we increased the amount of certifications that were allowed. If you're coming from a state that has a certification program for whatever your profession is that meets or exceeds what Georgia requires, then you don't have to go through the long drawn out certification process in Georgia. It's transferable. So it's a little different than a compact, but we have compacts as well, which is just a flat out agreement with a state. So one's state to state, one's individuals coming into the state. That was the thing that we were getting from our military veterans that they had the most concern about. And we've done multiple of these over the last few years to make their transfer easier, and not just on them, but for their family members. If with the military members, I guess a few years ago, I guess it's 3 years ago now, 4 years ago, you had a guy that had a CDL, commercial driver's license, in the military, their equivalent, their training. That was allowed to be transferred to the state so that, because, we got a shortage of CDL drivers. So if you got a guy that's trained to a standard that exceeds even what the state is offering, why make them go through the bureaucracy of doing it again? Why not just allow transfer? And that was great for the soldiers, but we were certain soldiers. I'm biased there. For the military members, but what we're getting is their bigger concern was for their families, that their spouse be able to continue on with the careers that they're building along the way while they're supporting their loved one who's serving.
One thing I'd like to know, Mike, you did some work on human trafficking, I think. What were the bills that came out of that?
We do continue work on human trafficking. Across the line, we've had, if you're the person who's trafficking humans, you got arrested. But if you were the person that was providing the hotel, the apartments, any of those areas where the trafficking was occurring, and you were turning a blind eye and letting it happen, you were off scot-free. We've said, no, you're as culpable as the person that was doing the trafficking. We had young people, and it's not necessarily young girls. It's young boys as well that were being trafficked and getting arrested for prostitution, and they were underage. So what we felt was, if you're violating a child, the child ought not be prosecuted. The child ought to be put in a loving, caring environment and given the emotional support they needed to try to get back on with their lives. So we did away with that. And we also made it easier to change your name, which doesn't seem like a big deal, but it's huge. So you don't have to go through the entire drawn out process. And some, as a guy, Missy could probably explain it to me better than I could, all the details that go in with a name change from when we got married, and her just changing her last name and Social Security, everything else that goes along with it. But we made it easier for those that have been in those circumstances to change their name. So one, they can get a clear lease on life, but two, those that trafficking is not usually a person. Trafficking is unfortunately most times an organization. And by allowing somebody to change their name, they are easier to make a clean break from the organization and try to get a good start on their life. It's extremely important to all of us. And when you have the first lady as that is her number one priority, it takes on it as great an emphasis as it has already. It takes on an even greater emphasis.
Thank you. The
Ms. Martha Ann, there's a question on the chat. Do you want to read it?
Is this the one by I was told by the Carrollton, is that the one?
Yes.
Okay. This is the question, or that leads up to it. I was told by Carrollton Chief of Police that the state decided what information is collected on traffic tickets. I'd like you to ask the General Assembly to add race on the tickets so that we will be able to track by race, which is being given, who is being given most tickets. Every time I've gone to traffic court, I see mostly young or elderly, low income, in appearance, African Americans. Why don't we want to know who is receiving tickets? It's a way of measuring transparency. The officer writing the ticket can see the race of the person, so it's judgment that needs to be transparent. If a department is stopping mostly Black people, we should be able to see that in their statistics. Any comments on that?
Yeah. I'll go first, and then Tyler, Paul, you can correct me since this is your area of expertise here. All that information was collected until the Obama administration. That's two sides of the same coin. They had stopped presenting the data, the racial data, because the thought process was it created a fair look at race, and they were afraid that an entire entity was going to be categorized by their appearance, and so it went away under his administration. The officers themselves do have the information internally tracked by who they, it's just not public knowledge because of the early decision, their earlier direction on how you track it. It's one of those, honestly, about every 10 years, you flip direction on that thing. We want to know by race, or it's creating biases out there because we're presenting it by race. And it flips back and forth. Tyler, Paul, what did I screw up?
No, I think you hit the nail right on the head. I mean, it would seem like this would really want to be something that we would want to disclose and would be transparent. But just like Majority Leader Dugan said, that there's some unintended consequences here as well. I think, from the court standpoint, we have, if there are certain measures that we have to issues of race entering into a, say, jury selection. So, I mean, that's something that, even as a defense lawyer myself, we're aware of those situations. But I think for now, it would not be wise to try to revisit this or revise that because of the negative light it would really cast on an organization that, even though the numbers or the statistics may show something that doesn't really show the real story. Numbers can be cooked. Numbers can be portrayed in this way or that way. And I surely wouldn't want one of our local law enforcement agencies, which for the record do a great job. I wouldn't want them to be cast in the wrong light. But, as we go forward, I mean, look, I'm a member of the Georgia Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. And these are something, I kind of keep a running tally of how many individuals I have of one race versus another. And that's something that we do keep up with. I mean, that these numbers, even though they might not be within the official state numbers, I would posit to you that it may be a better way of not allowing a misconstruing of numbers to have it done the way that it is now. These numbers, in some form or fashion, usually do make their way out into a form for the public to look at. And so I think you do see these numbers reflected in certain statistics, but I'm with Majority Leader Dugan. I think that for now it's best that we don't venture into requiring this as a part of our traffic citations that we have officers issue. Now, if you were to have a criminal incident report, yes, you're going to have race that is usually disclosed in a lot of those reports. I can't really think of any that would not specify the race. So, I mean, there are numbers that specify, especially, violent types of crime. But as far as traffic citations, I think it would really kind of even venture to create a false narrative when we really shouldn't be allowing for that to occur.
Yeah, I do think it's important though within each law enforcement agency. 2 years ago, I think they start running together after a little bit. Internal law enforcement agency procedure is they track their own people, and if you got a disproportionate number coming from one individual, that's going to raise some eyebrows and cause some action. When are we going to get back together in person? I love answering this, but this is not near as much fun as seeing y'all in person.
I'm hoping before long, Mike.
Yeah.
I do hope before long. Anybody else have some questions?
I'll ask one. Anything you want to comment on that you wish had been done in this session? You mentioned the one thing, but things that sort of just never made it to move forward that you would have been hoping would?
Yeah, I'll start with this one, Tom Paul, if you don't mind, because this one made me mad that it didn't pass. Officer Mike, holy cow! I just went blank on his name. McDonald. Yeah, yeah. He came to me last year. We were greeting every other week, and he goes, half the issues with stuff going on in traffic stops is nobody is taught what to do in a traffic stop. And he says, oftentimes stuff escalates quickly because of a lack of knowledge or understanding, not by maliciousness, but out of ignorance. He goes, in their regular training, adding blockage on should you be pulled over at a traffic stop, here's things that you should do. Remain in your vehicle, that type of stuff. All common sense stuff that he said that he's noticed over his time of being a law enforcement officer, that there are times stuff escalates just because people don't know any better. And it made it out of the Senate without issue. And then in the House, and I don't know what the details were in the House, but it had some hiccups and was considered a racist bill. And then got modified significantly, came back to the Senate and failed. And that, just knowing Mike and knowing how dedicated he is to trying to make our community better, that stung. That's coming back next time. And Mike's going to be the one that's sitting there in the chair in front of the committee and explaining the bill. So, nothing's lost in interpretation, that there's nothing lost through misunderstanding or a lack of a good quality explanation by the senator or representative that's presenting the bill. He gets to do it. But anything that we can do to de-escalate an issue that, we've increased significantly the amount of training and the training dollars for law enforcement in areas such as de-escalation and working with those with mental breaks. It's okay on the other side too to go, should you be pulled over? Here are some good common sense actions that you should take. And so that's one that upset me, that did not pass.
I could echo the same sentiment that Majority Leader Dugan has. I thought this was a no nonsense kind of piece of legislation, because I can remember the first time I was ever pulled over, and I'm a 16-year-old, just riding around. I wasn't doing anything wrong, but being pulled over, I just clam up, and even though I was, I kind of thought, well, what have I seen in, this movie or that movie of how you're supposed to react when you're pulled over? That was the best thing I had at 16 years of age to go by. And luckily, I knew the officer. It was a first cousin of mine with state patrol. And so, I was lucky, but others, they don't have their first cousin pulling them over the first time. And so I thought, out of all the meaningful things that we could teach as part of our driver's education, this would be one of them. Because as we all know, you don't even have to know how to do parallel parking to pass a Georgia driver's license test, or at least it was when I took it several years ago. And so this was something that I think would be beneficial to everyone. We could avoid so many misunderstandings and truly inform our citizens. And I'm not even saying make this a requirement to the test. As I recalled, I think this was just more of an informational thing to people that would be getting their license. They didn't have to know it to pass. It was just something for them to go through and learn about. And I'm not really sure what really killed it at the end of the day. I know that we kind of had some inflamed passions this past legislative session. And, as Leader Dugan mentioned, we work across the aisle on many issues. And I could tell that the polarization is starting to get a lot of members in the General Assembly. It's really kind of forcing a lot of people who want to see good progress made on things like this. They kind of got backed up in a corner, and that happens on both sides. We have it on our side, but the other party has it on their side too. And to see that strain, it's very unfortunate, but I have hope that we're going to break through that polarization. There's a lot of sentiment about it, but I'm truly hopeful. And just one thing of my own that I'll add that I wished had a passed but didn't. I had a piece of legislation dealing with landfills in the state of Georgia, and taking a closer look at how we, deal with landfills and what our capacity is in the state. Although my bill dealing with the limitations on landfills being or new landfills coming into the state, I'm thankful to Lynn Smith, who is actually the dean of our Carroll County delegation, for her foresight and recommending that we have a study committee on this, because I think things like landfill capacity, where are we at? How long do we have left in our current landfill capacities? I know some of them over at the legislature thought I was a little bit of a hippie for taking this on, and I'm okay with that moniker. I believe in being responsible in our waste and recycling. It's a great thing to do. I'm a huge conservationist. I'm a hunter, as you can probably see the wood duck right behind me, the first one that I was able to ever take when I was first starting to duck hunt. I'm a big conservationist. I want to still be able to hunt and fish and have generations after us to come behind me and hunt and fish. So I don't necessarily want to see our rural areas, which you'll see that people wanting to put landfills in, they target rural areas. The other part of my district in the 18th is Harrelson County, and we're a very poor county, and we need revenue just about any way we can get it. However, I don't believe that a dump is the solution to our economic woes. So I really look at this before you see too many landfills, trash mountains, if you will, piling up in our beloved and beautiful rural areas. So the bill's not dead. We're coming back next year. And the study committee, I'm looking forward to that this summer when Chairwoman Smith schedules that for a hearing.
Are there any other questions?
Martha, and there are some comments on the chat. Do you want to read them? Or do you want me to?
Go ahead.
Okay. These are two comments. The reason that this person had asked, it was that it was found that every Black person in Ferguson, Missouri had warrants, and millions of dollars were collected every year that went to the PD's budgets. Blacks were targeted to be used to collect fines that went to support the police budget. And the next one is related. Black families start teaching their kids at an early age how to behave to hopefully keep from being killed. Most of us believe it's a 50-50 toss. If you'll get stopped by a racist, bad apples cop, Black kids are taught by their parents how to conduct themselves, but nothing can prevent that from the bad luck of being pulled over by a cop with hate in his or her heart. What is being done about thoroughly setting high bars for police careers and throughout background checks to prevent bad apples from being hired in the first place? You have to unmute.
There you go. I can't respond to Ferguson. What happened to me? I lost y'all somehow on my video. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, you know what? I guess I'm gonna go without video here for a second. I don't know what happened right then. Again, I can't respond to Ferguson, Missouri. I'm not. Hold on. But as far as Black families teaching their kids little, we're not a Black family. I taught my kids from an early age how to react, how to respond, and then I understand it's not the same thing. I understand that that is, no matter what we do as through post certification, to call anybody that shows any triggers of any behaviors that we would deem unacceptable in our society. There's always going to be one that gets through. That where I hate that, but that's what it is. But we do a whole lot of testing, psychological testing, to ensure that the people that we're entrusting our society safety with can be counted on. So I don't know what else to add to that.
Thank you for your response.
I echo the same thing that Leader Dugan just said. I mean, it's something that I was taught as a young person as well by my parents, and I explain this to clients. I mean, the best way in responding to anyone that pulls you over is to always be polite and respectful. As long as we have a human element involved, it's just like the majority leader said, some of this will creep through. And I think just understanding, I think what's lost in some of the narratives from both sides is for us to listen to one another, for each side to listen to each other. I surely had it different than what some of my African American friends did. I can tell you numerous situations. I mean, buy into the civil justice or to the criminal justice system. We're having a huge disconnect right now, and trying to fight that, trying to, make sure that it's not lost, that we're not just turning a deaf ear to these things. I've even had conversations with the minority leader in the state house, and his move for, his thoughts on racial reconciliation and just engaging in the conversation. That's something you don't see very much. And just when I say engage in the conversation, that doesn't mean that I'm wholesale buying everything that comes to mind when you envision that. But just being willing to speak, I think partly that may have blown James's mind when I just voluntarily brought it up at an event that I saw him at, and just engaging in these conversations, listening to one another. But, I'll go back to this. The legislation that did pass of informing people on how to react to a traffic stop, that was a great way for the state to step in and do this. Now, I'll say this. We've got to have this conversation in each and every one of our own homes. But when the state can actually help out with this, I think we need to do it. This would be a great way for the state of Georgia. I mean, look, we've got a rough history when it comes to race relations. I freely admit that. I think this is a good way for the state to make a step forward. It may be seen as a small step, but the good that can come out of this, I don't think you can quantify. I think you'll have lives saved because of us being able to pass this legislation, and I'll be glad to vote for it when it comes back over to the House.
There is another comment on the chat. It says, since these injustice issues are at the forefront, what are some measures that are being proposed to combat the discrepancies that exist with communities of color as it relates to law enforcement and trainings? Who wants to tackle that one?
Sure, I can go first on that. I would say this, that, you know, at the state legislative level, we try to make law for the whole state and not just for one area necessarily. And not to belabor general or local bills or in the difference between what may work down in Brunswick may not work up in Rise and Fall, Georgia. So I think there is a little hesitancy about necessarily what may work better in Brunswick versus Dade County, Georgia. They have different viewpoints on race in Brunswick versus Dade County. And so I think we've been a little hesitant. I think our local law enforcement agencies, it's been real quiet, but I think you've seen a lot of these agencies have really stressed, you know, how do we react? How do we deal with these discrepancies? You know, what are we doing? Are we doing more training? Because you have to understand too that in a lot of these situations, there are split second decisions that have to be made by these officers. And so I think, you know, the implementation years ago of having every officer use or be certified to carry a taser and using a taser, using non-deadly force to de-escalate situations. That's something that can save lives. And if there is a discrepancy, these nonviolent measures that have been implemented, I think that has saved a lot of lives. But here's the thing about that: we don't know what the statistics are necessarily on those lives that have been saved. They only quantify the lives that are lost, and that's the sad part of the narrative that gets lost in this. Or what about the times that it did work, that good judgment was made? I mean, we don't quantify those, so we don't ever hear about the good. We only hear about the bad because the bad is what makes a lot of our media outlets rich. They sell the bad news. It sells a lot more than the good.
And Deidre, I understand the comment. You and I have had this conversation before. I open a suggestion. We've been talking one way or another for over a year now, and I'm open to suggestions. Bring some forward.
And also, if we can actually provide the information of you, Mr. Dugan and Mr. Paul, for people that if they want to contact you directly, that would be great.
Yeah, I think we're both on your Legal Women Voters handout. I know Ann puts those together.
Yes.
Every
The
year.
information is on the.
Things never been
director.
shy about reaching out. Yeah. Yep. Obviously, we work for y'all, so anytime you want to reach out, please do.
Well, we have come to the end of an hour, and we thank you both very much for being with us. And we do encourage the listeners to carry your concerns to these, get in touch with them. The political directory lists their emails and telephone numbers and mailing addresses so that you can contact them. And we'll look forward to seeing you again next year.
Likewise.
Well, hopefully I'll see y'all before that. Yeah, hopefully. And what I would say, if you're going to reach out to us, reach out with an idea. I'm okay with getting the criticism. That's part of it. But if you actually want to be productive and make a positive change, make a recommendation as well.
Thank you.
But good to see y'all. Y'all take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank y'all for having us.
Thank you so much. And
Thanks.
in the chat, there's a copy of the political directory. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank y'all.
See y'all.
Bye.
Good night.